All right, I tore it open. I was going to check and see if it was something with the VVT timing chain too, if it wasn't in the bottom end. Oil pan's a little bit of a pain to take off of there. It's got these bolts that go in the side of the mains through the oil pan, and then it's got those bolts, and you have to take the oil pump thingamajigger off to get the oil pan clearance to drop out. And so we start looking at like all these rods. That's pretty good, and this one's pretty good. You know, they're all pretty good, but this one right here, that's a bad rod bearing. So I'm just gonna pull it off because it almost feels like it's so loose that it just completely lost the rod bearing, but I don't think it could fall out of there. The other ones don't seem like they've worn that much, but this one is clanking. So let's just take it off in there and see what kind of condition that crank and stuff's in and what kind of condition that bearing's in. I mean, I think I'm going to do a new motor. I'm not going to rebuild this one, but I'm just curious what failed on there. The oil pan's pretty sludgy. I mean, the whole thing is pretty sludgy. It just hasn't had good oil changes in its life, and it's a pretty bad engine, so it needs a new one. But I'm just curious what's wrong with this one. So let me take this rod cap off, and we'll take a look and see. All right, so there is no rod bearing left in there. It's gone. It's a little metal left over, like it's from some bearing surfaces. The crank is pretty miserable too. That's going to be undersized, and it's going to have to be turned and polished, and you have to see if it's so undersized that you can't put like a 30 over bearing in there. But if that's that bad, these other ones aren't far from going, I'm sure. But it's just completely worn out, that rod bearing, and it's gone. I mean, it didn't fall out, it's just gone. So, yep. That's what's wrong with her. She got a rod knocking. But at least now we know, and we'll get the other engine and get that, you know, get it kind of cleaned up and new gaskets on it and put it in. Okay, folks, she got a bad rod. I'm going to get a new engine. I was going to take an older 3.5 and try to change it over or adapt it. What I found out after doing a little reading is this is an LZ4 3.5. It's different than those previous 3.5s that we had in previous years. Those previous 3.5s are built on 3.4s, and they're a little bigger. These are built off of the 3.9, and they have a shorter deck height. So it's a completely different engine, different block, different stuff. So you can't interchange them, right? So the junkyard I work with does not have one of these newer 3.5s in stock right now, so I'm gonna have to buy one. I found one for like $300 plus a core charge. So I'll probably get them my credit card or whatever they need next week to have them pull it. It's about a half-hour drive. I'll go pick it up, and then we'll get that back here. We'll redo gaskets and stuff on it if it needs it, and I'll probably go ahead and do an intake gasket and do a time and cover gasket and an oil pan gasket at least, and I might do main seals as well if they look like they're leaking. We'll get that all together. We'll get the Malibu pressure washed out, get the engine pressure washed off, make it all as clean as possible, putting it back together. I'm going to redo a lot of that wiring where the sheath, instead of the plastic sheath that's come off of it, I'm going to put new on it. Tape it, zip tie it, whatever I have to do to make it look neat and clean. I have a couple of connectors that are broken on this one. The one for the starter is broken. I'm just gonna go through my connector stockpile and find one and replace that, and you know, get the wiring all good and neat and clean, get the engine bay clean, get the engine clean, and drop it all in. But yeah, she's leaking oil like crazy. This engine has obviously not had regular oil changes. As much gunk and grease and crap is built up in there. I know it has a lot of mileage, but I've torn apart high mileage engines like this before and they've been clean. This is not clean. So a lot of people say, oh, these engines just leak like crazy, and they all do leak a little bit. They seep a little oil, right? But when you don't change the oil, you run old oil, not only do you put more wear on the engine, you cause those rubber gaskets and surfaces to just harden and get brittle and seep oil. One of the most important things you can do is change your oil in a reasonable time frame. And by that, I don't mean what the dealership says, what the manufacturer says. I mean, it's not the OEM spec for you change your oil every 12,000 miles. No. Change your oil at 3,000, at the most 6,000, right? Because I don't care if you're running really good synthetic super purple blue stuff, or you're running Roll King synthetic blend oil. Oil might not be oil, but carbon is carbon, and carbon gets in your oil and makes it abrasive. Oil gets old, and it starts to affect those seals and cause leaks. The number one thing you can do for your engine, in my belief, is change the oil regularly. Even if you're using the cheap Roll King or the Costco or the Sam's Club oil, change it regularly. One of the reasons they keep going like, oh, we're going to have super synthetic oils and ultra low, zero weight oils and all this stuff, and because they want to tell people this is cheaper to maintain. You don't have to change the oil but every 12,000 miles, and it ends up destroying the engine. So don't follow that advice. Clean oil is best for your engine. It just is. As far as that, oh, well, the additive packages don't start working until you hit this many thousand miles. Bull. Detergents and additives are in your oil to collect that carbon out and turn it into sludge piles in the bottom of your oil pan so that it doesn't keep circulating. By changing your oil, you eliminate that, right? So clean oil is better. Don't buy all this crap. Of course, a vat blended oil is really good, but Shell Rotella, for example, is really expensive. So a pipeline blended oil is fine. You just want to shake it up really good before you put it in, and run it, and then change it in 3,000 or 4,000 miles. I change my oil about every 3,000 miles. I go by on my GMs anyway, I go by the oil life left gauge, and I try to change that at 50%. And at 40%, it becomes like an emergency, like I have to get it changed right away. At 50%, I like to change it. And my vehicles have lots of miles on them, and they still run great. But that's anecdotal, I guess, but that's just how I believe it to be. Anyway, we'll get this one kind of halfway put back together, put some bolts in the oil pan to hold it up, because it's just going back as a core, and we'll get it off of the engine stand so we can put our new engine on the stand, and we'll go from there. I'll talk to y'all later. It's Tom, your Frugal Prepper.